Today's topic is hidden traps in spiritual life. It's a very intricate, intriguing subject. What are the unknown challenges and problems that a spiritual seeker has to encounter in his or in her life? Well, at the beginning, I would like to quote a few important sayings of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was the teacher of Swami Vivekananda, who is, as most of you know, the founder of this organization to which Vedanta Society belongs. His sayings are available in the form of a book which is known as the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He was born in the year 1836 and passed away in 1886. He lived in a temple, practiced spirituality, and went through different stages of spiritual illumination. And there were all types of people who came to see him, not only the conventional believers, but even atheists and agnostics who doubted the very relevance of spirituality and religion. Now, among them there were scholars, anarchists, people who were totally opposed to anything religious or spiritual, and also conservative, orthodox people who believed in God, who practiced ritualistic religion. In his sayings, you can come across a very rational analysis of the human mind. Because in spiritual life, we are experimenting with our own mind. We are confronting the problems of our own mind. It is a kind of inner warfare. As I mentioned in the last class, the only thing that we do not have control over is our own mind. We may be able to control the external nature through the mechanism of science and technology. We may be able to conquer distances. We may be able to conquer the natural phenomena and turn them into our servants and increase our comforts and luxury in life. We may be able to invent highly complex scientific, technological instruments. And we can predict with pinpoint accuracy, with a very high level of precision, how the machine that we invent is going to function. Not only now, maybe after several years. We can program our intelligence into the machine and it will work. But we can never program our own mind. So that is one of the problems in spiritual life. Incidentally, we can never be sure how our own mind is going to function even the next moment. Not only after some years, even next moment, how our mind is going to function, we cannot predict. That's why we face so many problems. There is nobody in the world among this 7 billion population inhabiting this planet Earth. There is nobody in the world who does not really want to lead a good life. It's a psychological fact. You ask any hardcore criminals in the prisons, you ask anybody, what you call confirmed sin, we may call them sinners. Well, that's a theological term which I would prefer not to use anyhow. Now, you ask any of them, and if you read the most advanced books on criminology, the one theory that we confront again and again is the crime is a necessary byproduct of certain sociological, cultural forces. Everything is the byproduct of the culture, the modern culture, the complex modern culture that we are living in today. Nobody really wants to do anything bad or evil, but many people do that. So why is this distinction, this difference between will and action? This conflict between will and action shows that we do not have control over our own mind. The moment we can somehow exert control over our own mind, we start the spiritual journey. And then these hidden traps get slowly loosened, and we start getting freedom from these hidden traps. I shall just quote a few important statements from Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. In one context, he says, the mind is everything. If the mind loses its liberty, you lose yours. If the mind is free, you too are free. The mind may get dipped in any color, like a white cloth fresh from the wash house. Study English and you must mix English words in your talk. Remember, Sri Ramakrishna said all these words in the latter half of 19th century. The English language, English education was slowly getting widespread in Indian subcontinent. The Pandit, the Sanskrit educated scholar, who studies Sanskrit must quote his verses. So you listen to anybody, you can very easily understand his personality and the way his mind functions when you listen to him. He may not be expressing what he really feels in his mind. He may be saying the very opposite of what he really thinks. But from that opposite, you can understand, you can get an idea of what could be in his mind. You make it its opposite, it may be in his mind. So, what Sri Ramakrishna says is, whatever we do, whatever we take in, that comes out. In other words, the way our mind functions is determined by what we do, what we think, and what we listen to, what all thought currents are going through our mind. Mind is nothing but the sum total or the abstract or the subtle residual element of all the activities, psychological, mental activities going on within the mind. Now, how to control the mind? Feed the mind with good thoughts, good ideas. If mind is functioning the wrong way, if mind is creating conflicts, if mind is becoming an obstacle in our spiritual life because of contradictions and conflicts, then we have to reduce the conflicts. Why do we face these conflicts? From a psychological point of view, it's very obvious. The conflict between will, what we really want to do, and what we habitually, in a very helpless condition, do really in actual conditions. What we normally do, persuaded and compelled by our natural instincts, accumulated tendencies and impressions, which constitute our character, forces our mind to function and do certain things. And that is in conflict with what we would like to do. So the conflict between what we want to do and what we normally do is the conflict. In fact, that is what is called a hidden trap in mind. Now, how do we change? How do we change the course of our psychological journey? The only way is to feed the mind with good thoughts. Just the body. Body very much depends upon the food that we eat. According to Vedantic tradition, the gross elements of the food that we eat create the body, the muscles, the blood, the bones, and things like that. The subtle element of the food that we eat creates the mind. Annamayam Soumya Manaha. There is a famous statement in the Samaveda, the Chandogya Upanishad. It may be very difficult for modern people to understand when you say that your mind is the creation of the food that you eat. Well, food is defined in two different ways in Vedantic tradition. One definition is the normal understanding that we have got with regard to food, what we eat. It should be pure, hygienic, free from bacteria and germs and things like that. Then body becomes healthy. But what about the mind? Suppose you go on eating very good food, absolutely pure and hygienic, become an extremely healthy person, free from diseases. Well, there are many such people in the world who spend 24 hours of their lifetime in doing undesirable things. Body is healthy, but mind is perpetually engaged in doing undesirable things. Some of the criminals are among the healthiest persons in the world. All the terrorists are very healthy people, mind you, eating very good food. You won't say that their minds are very pure. Body is very, very healthy. Now, what is that aspect of the food that influences the mind? The thought, the impressions, the tendencies, the thought waves, the attitude surrounding the food that we eat will influence the mind. That is the Vedantic definition. This is accepted in Vedanta and also in Yoga. The other definition of food is Aharati, means something that we take in. It is not food only that we take in. When we walk in the streets, we come across manifold, various types of visual objects. When we listen to radio or TV, we encounter various types of audio objects, thoughts and impressions entering the mind through the visual and through the audio instruments. So, an unhealthy idea coming through a visual or audio mechanism can influence the mind and pollute the mind even though the body is very healthy. So, as I said, there are two definitions for food. The first definition is very obvious one, what we eat or drink, the gross dimension of food. The other is the thought currents, the tendencies that we imbibe when the senses of perception come in contact with the external world. So when we listen to some bad words indicating bad ideas, or when we see some bad visual objects, which again bring in bad food, mental food to the mind gets polluted. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, the way we behave very often is influenced by not only the physical food, but also by the psychological food. In fact, psychological food is much more important. Sri Ramakrishna in this gospel elsewhere makes a very forceful statement, and that's something very, very interesting. You know, in those days, eating vegetarian food made under pure hygienic conditions was supposed to be very important for orthodox conservative people. Now, Sri Ramakrishna makes a statement. If you eat beef with God's name, if you eat meat with God's name in mind, that is better than eating pure vegetarian food without any spiritual ideas, with your mind full of vulgar, undesirable, unspiritual thought currents. It's a statement. Of course, I am not quoting the statement, but I am just giving an idea of what Sri Ramakrishna implies. It doesn't mean that you should eat meat or you should eat, it is right or wrong. It is insignificant. That's what Sri Ramakrishna implies. What you eat is of only secondary importance. What you think, what your mind thinks, what your mind imbibes is much more important. Because mind is subtler, stronger, and is much more influential than the physical body. So Sri Ramakrishna says, if the mind be kept in bad company, the evil influence of it will color one's thoughts and conversations. So that's very important. We need to explain this a little. Vedanta teaches that the whole world the entire universe is an expression of the divine. God or Atman is omnipresent, all-pervading. God is immanent, the indweller in all living beings. And Vedanta emphasizes the unity of existence, the inherent divinity of all beings. These are some of the vital principles of Vedanta. But Sri Ramakrishna says, if the mind be kept in bad company, the evil influence of it will color one's thoughts and conversations. Therefore, we have to be careful. How do we reconcile? It's a very important topic. To elaborate this further, I should take you to another famous spiritual classic, the Bhagavata Purana. There is a very psychological and very profound analysis of the importance of human association, human interaction. One verse says, in fact, it's a definition of the highest devotee, of the highest devotion. Who is the highest devotee in the world? Is he the one who goes to a church or a temple or a place of worship, who reads scriptures every day, mechanically every day in a fixed hour, going to the Sabbath, the prayer or the liturgy, attending the liturgy or puja, worship in the temple or any place of worship? Is he the highest devotee? He is a devotee. He is a devotee of God. He is a spiritual man or a woman, but does she or he belongs to the highest category? Bhagavata Purana, this spiritual classic, says no. It says, the one who says God, who sees, experiences the presence of God in all living beings, and the one who experiences the presence of all living beings in God, is the highest devotee. Such a highest devotee cannot see or experience anything in this world except God, because everything is divine, the expression of the divine. The omnipresence and the immanence of the divine is a matter of not faith, but of everyday experience for such a devotee. The verse is this: Sarva bhudeshu ye pasyet bhagavad bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavadottamaha. Bhagavadottama in Sanskrit, in English it means a devotee of the highest type. Let us say general way, a spiritual seeker of the highest type is the one who sees God everywhere and who sees all in God. Seeing here means experiences in every moment of his life or her life. Now, this is the highest state of spiritual enlightenment, which can be claimed by a Jesus Christ or a Buddha or Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or a Shankaracharya or any of the great spiritual personalities the world has produced, or the great mystics. they may have experienced the presence of God everywhere and the presence of all in God, seeing all in one and one in everything. But an average spiritual seeker doesn't belong to this category. He has to work in the office, he has to work in a factory, he has to work in a IT center. He has to get engaged in all kinds of secular, worldly activities, working hard to earn his bread or her bread. Now, what should such a devotee do? There, the next verse of the same text says, before you reach the highest mystical level, where you can see the presence of God everywhere, you have to be very careful. Then only you will reach that level. See, a Buddha or a Jesus could convert sinners into saints and sages. They could do that. We should not assume that we have become Buddhas and Christs and try to convert sinners into saints. So, for us, it is only an intellectual idea, a remote goal to be reached. It is not a matter of our real experience. It is a high idea that we have to slowly evolve towards. So, the next verse says, for ordinary spiritual seekers who are in the process of slowly evolving in spiritual life, they should be very careful. They should have devotion to God, and they should have an attitude of friendship towards fellow devotees, fellow spiritual seekers. And they should have sympathy for those who are not interested in spiritual life. We must try to influence, or we must try to slowly try to talk to them about spiritual ideas. And what about those who are very powerful people, very powerful personalities, but with negative ideas? So, Sri Ramakrishna says, the Bhagavata Purana says, we have to be very careful. Because before we reach the highest spiritual experience, if you try to interact with people of wrong instincts and wrong tendencies and wrong attitudes, who are very powerful people, we are likely to be converted by them if we try to convert them to our path. So, it's something like it happens. An example is given by a great commentator. Well, a person is brought up in a very pious family, a boy who is taught to sin. To steal is a sin, to tell a lie is a sin. Well, he's brought up in that way. If that boy or girl gets associated with people who are not adverse to the acts of stealing or telling lies, but who are very powerful, influential personalities, then what happens? Through this long association, slowly the person who was initially taught that to tell a lie is a sin or wrong will slowly come to a reconciliation. Well, under certain circumstances, perhaps it is not wrong to tell a lie. So slowly there is a conversion taking place in the wrong direction. And if this association continues, it is very likely that anybody who is in the process of practicing spirituality may lose his spiritual foundation and may slowly move towards the opposite direction. That is why Sri Ramakrishna stresses the importance of associating with fellow devotees, spiritual persons, people with positive ideas, people whose association helps you in your spiritual life, people who can give you ideas which reinforce your own spiritual convictions, enrich your own spiritual personality, instead of associating with people who may question your own spiritual practices. Because skepticism, sometimes cynicism can be poisonous, dangerous in spiritual life, especially when we are in the process of evolving in spiritual life before we reach the highest goal. Once we reach the highest goal, there is no problem. You can associate with anyone. A Buddha could convert, Jesus could convert, Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna could bring about a total change in the minds of many people who came to him. But before reach the highest experience, we have to be careful. So Sri Ramakrishna makes a statement, if the mind be kept in bad company, the evil influence of it will color one's thoughts and conversations. Placed in the midst of good people, spiritually oriented people, the mind is sure to meditate upon God and God alone. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, the mind is everything. The attraction for worldly things may be there, but a higher attraction towards spiritual ideas is important. That's why it is said, bondage is of the mind, freedom too is of the mind. So bondage and freedom takes place at the mental level. Now, Sri Ramakrishna later on will give a few prescriptions for the devotees. We must try to enrich and reinforce our mind with spiritual ideas through spiritual practices. Now, one main problem in spiritual life is, as I mentioned earlier, we often delude ourselves into thinking that what we understand to be a fact at the intellectual level, we sometimes delude ourselves into thinking is a matter of real experience. When we read Vedanta, when we read yoga, or when we read the works of instructions of any great spiritual seeker, sometimes we are highly impressed. And then we think, well, it's a reality. And then we try to describe ourselves as Vedantins or spiritual seekers. But there is a higher dimension. There is a higher dimension in Vedanta, the experience dimension, which goes beyond reason and logic. I can give an example. If you teach Kantian philosophy, Kant's philosophy, somebody will call it a Kantian. If you teach Marxian philosophy, you call it a Marxist. If we call empiricism, you call it empiricist. If you teach humanism, it's called a humanist. Can we call ourselves as Vedantists when we teach Vedanta? We cannot. That's the main difference. One becomes a Vedantin when Vedanta reaches some level of our inner personality, when Vedanta reaches the level of our experience. That's the most important difference between Vedanta as a system of philosophy and other philosophical systems. In other words, Vedanta is not just a system of philosophy. Because in ordinary philosophy, we stop with reason and logic. But when we try to understand Vedanta through the prism of logic and reason, we commit a terrible mistake. Logic and reason are necessary. But beyond that, there is the experience dimension of Vedanta. So, from a historical point of view, we can say Vedanta reconciles, it affects a reconciliation between theology, philosophy, and experience. Shankaracharya says, Srutya, Yuktya, Svanubhutya. Shruti means theological books, Vedas. Yukti means reason. Experience means one's or inner experience. Experience relates to mysticism. In other words, Vedanta affects a kind of reconciliation, synthesis between theology or religion, reason or philosophy, and experience or mysticism. They are removed, they are rolled into one. Because Vedanta is the path to complete total freedom. The greatest problem in modern Vedantic thinking, Vedantic interpretation, especially in Western world, in academic sense, is Vedanta is sometimes interpreted in terms of pragmatism. That's a very serious problem. There is a cleavage, a great gap between Vedanta as a spiritual experience and Vedanta as a system of philosophy. So when we try to interpret Vedanta according to pragmatic understanding, there is a big problem. In fact, some of these ideas are stated in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Pragmatism means linking what we do with its immediate benefits, utility, some kind of empirical, worldly utility. Whatever we do, whatever we think, we want to relate it to some kind of empirical utility. So sometimes in many contexts, people ask the question, can I improve the performance of my employees through Vedanta? Increase the profit of the company through Vedanta? Can be more successful in business life through Vedanta? This is a terrible mistake. So that's why sometimes Vedanta is misunderstood as a negative philosophy. It's not a negative philosophy. In fact, a real Vedanta, real spirituality begins when you stop relating, when you break the link between what we do and its immediate worldly benefits. If we can think and meditate for some time, remain in the company of ourselves, completely breaking the link with any of his worldly utilitarian benefit, that's the beginning of true spirituality. In fact, that's why spirituality is sometimes defined as higher than religion. Because in religion we pray. And we very often pray for worldly benefits. Heaven. And our understanding of heaven is a place where everything is provided. But spirituality is something that goes beyond the concept of heaven. I already explained these things in the previous lectures. The small boy Nachiketa asked for the third boon to his teacher. He wants to know the mystery of death. He says, well, I'm not worried, I'm not satisfied with going to heaven. Even heavenly comforts are no attraction for me. Heavenly comforts are only an extension of whatever comforts we can have in this world. But what is the reality of our existence? With death, body perishes. Does something remain intact even at the time of death? Or is death the end of the journey? So in answer to this question, his teacher gives an exposition of the highest Vedantic truths. He says, in reality, death is only a coma. It is only a creative crisis, a temporary change of route. In reality, you are the Atman, the immanent, omnipresent Atman, the supreme truth, which is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. And this body is only a vehicle for this Atman to function. The moment you realize this, you won't have to come back to this world. There is no more embodiment. You won't take birth again. You become one with that Atman. This truth, if you can keep in mind, this proper wisdom, that means the imperishable, immortal nature of Atman, and the perishable nature of everything else. This wisdom, if you keep in mind, then this journey of life will be fruitful. So, life is sometimes compared to a journey in a chariot. To effectively lead the chariot to its proper destination, you need horses which are obedient. And you should have reins in your hands which will effectively control the direction of the horse. And if you do not have proper reins in your hands to control the horses, you may not reach your destination. Horses are the senses. Reins correspond to human mind. And the one who drives the chariot is an intellect, wisdom, endowed with wisdom. So a wise person is able to effectively control the horses with a balanced mind, and then we will reach the destination of spiritual life. That's the idea behind it. This wisdom begins only when we stop relating whatever we do with its immediate worldly benefits. That's why there is an interesting statement where the limitation of reason is emphasized. Many modern psychologists try to give a glimpse into the higher dimension of human personality, going beyond reason. The field of reason or of the conscious workings of the mind is narrow and limited. This is the statement from Complete Works. Swamiji says, reason is limited by itself. Reason properly followed will take us to a state beyond reason. One of the main problems in spiritual life is we try to interpret spiritual life and spiritual problems by the help of reason and logic. There are two approaches to go beyond this trap. One is the approach in Vedanta, the other is the approach in devotional philosophy, in popular religion. In popular religion it is called grace. In Vedanta it is called self-effort endowed with wisdom. In popular religion it's easily understood. Grace is necessary. But to be able to make use of grace, we should become grace-worthy. There are several examples. One example is found in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna himself. He takes the example of a person who is desirous, who wants to cross a river. He's sitting on one bank of the river. There's a boat tied to the anchor. He's sitting here. And what he does, first he unties the anchor. Then he enters the boat. He rows for some distance till he reaches the midstream. And then he is able to make use of the wind that is blowing, and he can reach the destination, the other bank of the river. Suppose he sits on the bank, just expressing his desire, well, I want to cross the river, without making any effort, he won't be able to cross this river. Now, there are two elements involved in this process. One is self-effort, the other is grace, symbolically. Self-effort is involved in his activities, like untying the boat from the anchor, rowing for some distance, till he reaches the midstream. He will not be able to make use of the wind that is blowing till he reaches the middle of the river, because then only he will be able to cross it. So he needs self-effort. Without self-effort, we won't be able to make proper use of grace. But grace alone is not necessary. Of course, in some theological traditions, grace is supreme, but at the higher interpretation you find, this grace sometimes comes to us in the form of our willingness to put up self-effort. That's how they reconcile both these. Another example is found in the teachings of Saint Teresa of Avila. There she gives the example of a farmer. A farmer wants to irrigate the field. But the field is now full of thorns, stones and pebbles. If you sow seeds in that field and if you irrigate that field, you won't get any benefit because the grains will not grow. The field is not ready. It is dry, it is full of thistles, thorns, pebbles and stones. So first the farmer should make the field ready. For that, he should work hard. He should remove the weeds, the thorns and stones. And then, if he wants, he could bring water to the field. It could be done either by cutting a canal from the river nearby or by bringing water in buckets using water mill as it is stated in the book. These are various ways of bringing water to the field, irrigating the field. And once the field is ready, by removing all the stones and weeds and other obstacles in cultivation, then if irrigation is done by bringing water, and then if you sow the seed, you will get good yield. But suppose the farmer just irrigates the field without making any effort to make the field ready, then he won't get any benefit. Now, suppose he works hard, sincerely, removes the field, and the field is ready, removes the pebbles and stones, the field is ready, then he is about to start his own effort to bring water to the field, and it starts raining, then he will get the good crops. This rains represent grace. So grace will not be of much use unless the field is ready. So mind should be ready. And mind can be ready for spiritual life only by imbibing spiritual thoughts. This is possible by reading good books and also associating with spiritual personalities. And if that is not available, the next most important and useful method is by reading the lives of great spiritual people. If we cannot directly associate with spiritual personalities, we can associate with them by reading their life. Because lives of great mystics and spiritual personalities is much more effective than reading teachings. Because the one important problem in spiritual life is we never get the full conviction that God is real unless we get a little bit of experience. That's a very serious problem in spiritual life. Our faith is only academic. See, I know very well that now the time is 12 o'clock. If I make this statement and today is Sunday, it's perfectly all right. When we say, well, God exists, do we mean, are we making the statement with the same level of certainty as saying that it is 12 o'clock now? God is real, we may make the statement. That statement is real, we believe in it. But if we really believe, we don't have to make a statement. If you really believe in something, it is no more belief. It's a fact. I can't say I believe it is 12 o'clock now. If I can see the clock in front of me, I don't make the statement, it is 12 o'clock. Because it is so very obvious. So Sri Ramakrishna makes an interesting statement with regard to faith. Real faith is very, very, very helpful. And real faith of a person who is pure in mind is almost as good as experience. So real faith comes only for a pure mind, and purity of mind can be achieved only through association with spiritually oriented people, or by enriching our mind, reinforcing our mind with spiritual ideas. If the mind is not fed with positive spiritual ideas, it will seek its own food. And that food may be sometimes poisonous food. Skepticism, irrational doubts, and many things like that. This Swami Vivekananda makes a very interesting statement in this context. He says, a really enlightened person who is inspired, he may be speaking from a transcendental level, beyond the level of reason and logic. But his statements will never go against reason. It goes beyond reason. Spirituality and spiritual experience can never be contrary to reason, but goes beyond reason. It transcends reason. Swami Vivekananda makes a very important statement, very practical statement. When you hear a man say, I'm inspired, and then talk irrationally, reject it. So people say, I believe in God, and then hate everybody else in the world. There is a contradiction. You believe in God, whom you consider to be the creator, who you consider to be compassionate and merciful, and we hate everybody in this world. So it cannot be. There is a contradiction, an inherent contradiction. So if a person becomes really spiritual, that spirituality expresses itself in many ways, like broad-mindedness, compassion, a humane attitude towards other people, and accepting all religions as equally valid path leading to the same goal. How can we accept God and spirituality, which is universal on the one hand, and then hate anybody or anything in this world? So Swami Vivekananda says, when you hear a man say, I'm inspired, and then talk in a most irrational fashion, reject it. Why? Because these three states, instinct, reason, and superconsciousness, or the unconscious, conscious, and superconsciousness, belong to one and the same mind. These are not three minds in one man, but one state of its development, others. When you reach the highest spiritual experience, then we understand that experience contains in it reason, logic, everything. In other words, it transcends logic and reason. So, earlier I stated the importance of graceworthiness and self-effort. Self-effort enables us to become graceworthy, to recognize the importance of grace when it comes. This is a devotional approach. In Vedantic approach, in philosophical approach, in the non-dualistic tradition, this experience transcends reason and logic. At the experience level, the highest devotion and the highest Vedantic approach are the same. As means, as paths, they may differ, but at the highest experience level, when we reach the goal, we understand they mean the same thing. So when we reach the highest transcendental experience of oneness of existence through Vedantic path, then also we become universal in our approach and attitude. And when we become a real devotee, by reconciling and synthesizing self-effort and God's grace, then also we reach the same experience level of spiritual illumination. So after this we will have an interaction. If any of you needs further, if there is doubt, long discussion we will discuss at that time. After the class there will be interaction Vivekananda Hall. No, thank you. Namaskar.